Hello, everybody. This is Jane. It's Tuesday night tonight. We usually do this on a Thursday night, and I'd like to welcome my good friend Nick Bradley to the show.
Jane, it's
Welcome.
a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here on a Tuesday night.
We've got so much to talk about tonight, haven't we, Nick? I mean, when we start talking, we never stop, do we?
I know everyone's going to be like, come on, guys, it's Tuesday. We need to be watching Netflix and drinking wine. We're gonna have to make it really interesting for people. We're gonna have to kind of go into all sorts of stuff to make sure that everyone gets a lot of value out of our conversation.
Definitely. And that's the second time you've mentioned wine tonight, Nick.
I
Has there been
know.
a lot of wine drinking in your household over the
Do
last?
you know what? I have to confess that there has been probably too much wine drinking and beer drinking over the COVID period, and I'm not
Same
massively
here.
into that. But I think you know what? I've been doing a lot of running as well, so I think having a cheeky glass of wine when I get home from a run at night time, that seems okay to me.
Yeah, exactly. Mixing the both. Yeah. I was actually reading the paper today that some people are starting to drink before lunchtime, and that's not good, is it?
No, I don't do that.
No.
Mind you, I must say there might be a Saturday or something like that where I've mowed the lawn and I've done heaps of stuff in the morning. I might have a beer at lunch, but with
Yeah.
lunch. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't. I'm not drinking it like 9 in the morning.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's good news. All right. So we've got some very, very exciting topics to talk about tonight because Nick always has lots of exciting stuff going on for him. But before we get into that, Nick, would you like to just introduce yourself and for people that don't know you already, and just tell us what you've been up to over the last few years?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think a lot of people in the community have met me before, but for those who haven't, so Nick Bradley, I call myself a business scale-up specialist, and I'll get into what that means in a second. But I'm also an investor, entrepreneur. I started my first business when I was 18, sold that when I was 20. I started another business at 20. So the first one that I sold did well. The second one was a collapse in a pit of despair. And then I kind of ran off to the world of corporate and kind of hid there for a few years before coming back into it. So I did that for a long time. But scale up, yeah, I've worked for about a decade with private equity firms. And for those who don't know what that is, it's basically investment firms who go and buy businesses that are undervalued, and then they expect to kind of do certain things to drive growth, and then they sell those businesses for a higher multiple. And it's quite a nice way of doing investment. I do a lot of that myself personally these days. But I did that for 10 years. I went into those businesses. I was kind of the turnaround guy. I'd go in there and I'd kind of restructure things and try and fix problems, mainly around the commercial side, the sales and marketing side. I did that. And then I decided to kind of go and do that for myself about 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago now. And the reason for that, and I kind of quite useful for people, is that I saw lots of really good businesses get in sort of, not going to say closed down, but they were given up on too quickly and they could have been turned around. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to change my philosophy and my ethos, and I'm going to work with entrepreneurs and business leaders, turning what I call good companies into great ones, and spending more time on that side of the fence as opposed to the investor side. And it's been a great ride, and the podcast has come off the back of that, and I'm sure we'll get into all of those cool things this evening.
Great. So let's talk about what makes a company good before we go on to what makes a company great. So what would be the ideal company that you would look at, you would come into and help?
Yeah, so let me define it for you, because I think it's an interesting one, because a lot of people ask the question. They say, well, hold on, not all companies are good, are they? And the definition I have of it is that if a company has gone through startup phase, so in other words, they've created a product, they've managed to find customers, they've created revenue, and they're kind of on that trajectory. A lot of businesses start fast and then they stall, but they start well and they've got something going on. My sort of definition is that that's a good company. It may not be an optimized company, but it's a good company. It started to get what we call product market fit. It started to, as I said before, win customers, drive revenue. But what traditionally happens is those businesses, then they get stuck, and we'll get into why they get stuck tonight, because I think it's an interesting conversation. So my premise is this: that's a good company, and it has the potential to grow and to scale and to be a great company, but for whatever reason, something's gone wrong. So I don't think it's a bad company at that point. It might be a good company that's lost its way, but a good company for me is one that has shown that momentum, that traction, and has the potential to do that again. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's different from the kind of basket case companies where they never really were that great from the very beginning. And there are ones out there that, they've never really sold much. They haven't been that profitable. They're normally the ones, and this is going to sound really funny, I think, to some people, where they've got such a committed, almost dogged entrepreneur driving them, that person's not going to give up. And sometimes, to be frank, those companies can end up being great companies. So, you can't challenge or judge it too much, but quite often the creative entrepreneur with an idea that he thinks or she thinks is fantastic, sometimes they're only fantastic in those people's minds. So let's not talk about that. But great companies, outstanding companies, and I've seen heaps of these through my private equity days, are the ones where they've got a few things in place. Okay, and the first thing they've got in place is they run like a machine. There's predictability around how they drive revenue. There's predictability about how they bring in customers and drive profit. They tend to have systems and processes and automation. So everyone kind of knows how it all works. It's almost like, like a performance car or a high precision watch. There's an articulate level of detail that's gone into making the thing. And when it runs, it just runs for ages. It's sustainable. It's valuable. So that's the first piece. Yeah. And then it's underpinned by great leadership. This is the other thing that people kind of, miss a little bit. And great leadership is not just having a great leader as the chief exec. It's the team, it's the management, it's the culture, it's the values, it's the behaviors. And when you get those things working with the processes and systems, you start to get this magical thing going on where the business just kind of keeps innovating. It almost takes a life of its own. And that's the sort of business that I think is outstanding and great. And you see them, you see the Apples of this world do that. You see the Amazons have constantly innovated. There's big names out there, but there's also lots of smaller businesses that can do that as well. Certainly ones that I've seen over my career, if you like.
So that sounds great. So could you give us an example of a smaller business that you particularly admire, or maybe one that you've come across personally or invested in personally, Nick?
Yeah, so I won't name them all here because some of them are my clients. Sure. I was on a call today. Actually, it was really funny. I'll share this with you. I was on a call today. There's a person I've been working with for now just over a year, and he contacted me on the podcast, and it's quite funny actually. And I said to him, "How's it all going?" And he said to me, "Listen, Nick, we've grown 35% in the year that you and I have worked together."
Wow.
Yeah, and he's actually even had, like, through the COVID, the last 3 months, he's had his biggest growth.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't quite know the detail. He's telling me today, and he said to me, this is the funny bit. He goes, "Having you around, Nick, is like having two brains. My brain and your brain. It's like, it's amazing." And I'm like, okay, it's a bit quirky. But anyway, to go back to it, like what he's done, what has he done? So, it's not about me, it's about him. Okay, first and foremost, he's just asked questions. I've asked him good questions. The combination of us doing things has kind of got to some really good decisions, if you like, that have then turned into results. So that business is, first and foremost, he's got the structure of the business right. So he's gone in there and he's put in place the right people. He's had to make tough decisions because beforehand he didn't have that in place. The really cool thing that he's done over the COVID situation is he's launched 3 new really big products. And one of those products, serendipitously, weirdly, whatever you want to call it, absolutely nailed the psychology of businesses. It's a B2B business in the kind of education space. But it absolutely nailed the psychology of people who were having to work from home and how to do that effectively and how you manage things like well-being when people are in a different environment. And that thing just flew off the shelf. But it didn't get lucky. I mean, this is a guy who has kind of taken the principles of scale up and he's done the work. So all credit to him.
Because at the end of the day, you do have to do the work. I mean, despite, the best brains and of course, even somebody like you standing alongside, it's no good unless you take action, right? No,
precisely. And this is the thing I say to people, and I'm sometimes quite direct about it. And I mean this with sincerity, and I don't mean it to sound bullish or anything, but there are certain people that I can't work with. And it's not because they're not good people. It's not because they're not good businesses. It's just that you kind of know that the commitment is not going to be there. And what's interesting, as you know, I've interviewed some pretty powerful people on Scale Up Your Business.
Oh, yeah.
Billionaires and people who have got high net worth in the hundreds of millions of dollars. A lot of my stuff is US focused.
Yeah.
And there are 5 things. I'll share this with you because I think it's important for people to listen to as well. There are 5 principles that I've noticed around success. And I went back and listened to a few episodes recently just to kind of test this. And it's kind of like a thread that runs through. And the first one is these ultra successful people is they're very decisive. They make a decision, and it doesn't mean they don't change their mind, but they go at it. And one of my mentors used to say yes and figure it out later. And that's a kind of common thing that seems to happen. They jump in, they make a decision. They don't kind of hedge too much. So that's the first bit. The second one is they're focused, like super focused, laser focused. And we should talk about that tonight, because I think that is the one thing that most people I work with or see, they fail to understand the power of focus.
Okay.
Yeah, it's huge. Then you've got discipline, and that's literally just gritting it out. It gets tough. Growing a business is not easy. You've got to grit it out. Then you've got consistency. And I had John Lee Dumas. If people don't know who he is, he's a prolific podcaster in the US. Probably not quite Joe Rogan, but he's made $17 million off his podcast.
Wow.
I know. And I asked him the other day when he was on my show, I said, how did you do it? And he said, Nick, for 2.5 years, right? So how many days is that? 700 days? Don't know. He did not miss publishing a podcast episode. So that's like 600 or 700 episodes without a break, without a miss.
Really?
Yeah. So that's how you do it. And then the last one, which is probably the obvious one, is like be massively productive. Everyone's got 24 hours in a day. How many times do you waste that time? And these guys, the really successful ones, are so intentional with their time, and it's really impressive to see. So that's kind of what I've noticed over the last 12 months of interviewing these fascinating people.
I mean, it must have been a wonderful experience for you as well, Nick, because you're getting all of that really, really high level thinking in a way.
To be honest, it's free mentoring for me,
of course,
because what people don't appreciate is it's not what happens during the podcast. It's what happens in the 30 minutes to an hour, before or after. So when I was talking to Neil Patel was on for an hour. So Neil Patel's like probably one of the most prolific marketing geniuses in the world. He certainly has been known that for over a decade. And when he came on, we spent another hour and a half talking after we'd finished the recording. So I was with him for 2.5 hours, and he was picking my brain on investment strategies and stuff.
Yes.
But you know what? I got so much richness out of how he'd built his business, his brand, just from the side conversation. So I'm very grateful to have those opportunities, which the podcast has allowed me to do.
Yes, and I love the episode as well, by the way.
Yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah.
I've got one coming out this week. I don't want to say who it is. Shall I? Oh, I might tell you. I might tell the audience. Okay. So this is a bit of a polarizing one. This is an interesting one. So coming out on Thursday is Patrick Bet-David. Now, if you haven't heard of Patrick Bet-David, he's got a YouTube channel called Valuetainment. It's got over 1 billion views. And he's effectively retired. I think his net worth's about $350 million, something like that. But he is the most outspoken, parochial guy that you'll get. So it's quite a challenging interview for me. It's one of those ones where he's such a force of nature. I've got to be on my game. Yeah. But this guy is, man, he takes focus and commitment and drive and passion, all those things to another level. He's full on. The funny thing about it is he's one of the last people to interview Kobe Bryant. And if people don't know, Kobe Bryant was a famous NBA basketball player. I think most people may have heard it. He passed away, I think it was beginning of the year. And so Patrick Bet-David was one of the last people to interview him. So we talk about that on the show, and we talk about the power of leadership and what it takes to be the greatest of all time.
Oh, that sounds like an amazing episode. Right. I will definitely be listening.
Okay. Out Thursday.
Yeah. So let's go back to this topic of focus, which you talked about earlier. So tell us about focus and why it's so important.
Yeah. So focus is one of those things that what people don't appreciate sometimes is, as much as I'll say I'm a specialist in scale up and growth, I'm still growing myself, right? So I don't sit there and say I'm the fully formed article, or, calling yourself an expert's a funny one. I probably prefer to call myself a curator, because I'm taking ideas from lots of different sources that I'm getting involved in, and I'm probably adding my perspective and my spin to it. So focus for me, I call it a superpower.
Yes.
Because, and you and I have spoken about this before, and we've been around, rooms full of entrepreneurs, and they're all, what they call the shiny object syndrome. And, it's one of those pieces where everyone's trying to jump onto the next thing. There's a number of people that I think you and I both know who they go down one path, and all of a sudden they either lose confidence or they get distracted by something else, and then they jump the path. And what's happening is all they're doing is, I love this expression, instead of going, a mile deep and an inch wide, they're doing the exact opposite. Like they're going, a mile wide and an inch deep. And if you keep doing that, you're never going to get to the gold. You're never going to get to the thing that matters. And that's the piece where, I always say you've just got to get better at it. How do you do it? Well, first and foremost, get someone to hold you accountable for what you say you're going to do. That's important. It doesn't have to be, it can be a friend. It can be, it's hard to get family to do it. Like, if I said to my wife, hold me accountable, she'd laugh at me and think I was an idiot. In a nice way.
Well, you're already too accountable to me.
but I've got 2 mentors, and I've got a performance coach myself, right? So I go out there and I try and learn from the best people that I can afford to work with, right? So that's my thing. And what I found is, the more that you commit to something and the more that you run its course, the better it becomes. And I'll give an example of that for people. So I was offered opportunities to do many, many things when I started this podcast. And I think, you and I were in some of the same masterminds and groups, Jane.
Right.
And it's difficult because everyone's saying, do this, do that. You've got to launch this. You've got to do your Instagram. You've got to have your Twitter feed out here. You've got to do this. Got to do that. And I sort of said, you know what? I'm just going to do one thing. I'm just going to double down, triple down on the podcast. And everyone was saying, oh, that's not the right thing to do. You've got to build your brand, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, I'm going to build my brand, but I'm just going to build my brand through the podcast. And to be frank, I've stayed true to that for almost 18 months. And I'm doing other stuff now, and I've got different things going on now. But I kind of feel that the prize for being able to do more things now and to have a team that can support me and all that is because I focus so much on the podcast.
Yes. And I think, well, the podcast itself is absolute testimony to that strategy, because it is phenomenal. And you're getting how many downloads per episode?
Oh, God. It ranges 5,000, 10,000. It depends on who's on. The smaller ones get less, but I think we're at about 150,000.
Yeah.
I think something like that. I need to look. I don't look at them all the time. There was a point in time where I used to look at the metrics all the time and used to get really excited about it and all the tables and the charts and all that. These days, I've become more relaxed about it. And I'll explain why that's important as well for anyone who wants to do a podcast. But I think sometimes you can get over concerned with those things. And I'm trying to help one person at a time. And I try and create each podcast with that philosophy in mind. And I think that just adds more power to the episodes.
Yeah. So I've got some questions coming through, Nick. So let's have a look. So one says, hi, Rob. Well, okay. Maybe that's because Rob said hi, because unfortunately they're all coming through as Facebook users because nobody's actually pre-registered, but it doesn't matter. Right. Good evening to 2 wonderful people. Well, thank you very much.
That's nice.
Yeah.
See, I told you we should have got some wine out, and we should be.
Yeah, I know. We should have
could have been a wine party. You know what's really frustrating, Jane? Is I can just see Facebook user, and there's some really nice comments here, but I can't see who's making them.
I know. I should have stolen my daughter's birthday prosecco from downstairs. That would have gone down well.
That's okay.
Yeah, really starting to like this guy. You've acquired another fan. He's very helpful. I know it's not hard. Okay, focus is critical, not important. So you've got somebody agreeing with you there. Creative curating with unleashed superpower.
That's nice. I've got someone.
Yeah.
Can come and help with some of our copywriting.
Yeah.
I struggle sometimes, but that's a nice coin of phrase. Thank you.
Yeah. Then we've got take me 50 years. Hold on. Taken me 50 years to focus to get where I wanted. It's a long time. Accountability is about choosing to do something and then doing it. Commitment is critical. So does it really take 50 years of focus to get what I wanted?
It can take that long. I don't think it needs to take that long, but it can take that long. Sometimes, and this isn't a judgment, sometimes it takes people a long time to work out what they want to do in life. You know, that whole thing about you know, what do you want to do when you're a kid? And at 15, school asks you, and then, God, it took me, I didn't work out what I wanted to do really until I was about 40, and I started doing what I'm doing now. Before that, I was kind of just living a different life. So, 50 years, that seems reasonable to me, because it took me 20 odd.
I don't think it does any harm to experiment and experience a few things, because when you're younger, you just don't know yourself in the same way. And I'm sure that Nick would agree with that. We go through phases, we're changing and developing and learning all the time. And when you get older, you have those cumulative experiences that make you a little bit wiser in some respects. And so that makes it easier to, I think, to make decisions and to actually take that step into the thing that you really always wanted to do. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and also, again, the Patrick Bet-David interview is interesting because he talks about your life in 4 quarters.
Yes.
And I won't spoil what he says, but I think anyone who's of a certain age, you still have time. You still have time to do whatever. I don't think it's about giving up. And
No.
it doesn't matter when you start. There are plenty of examples of people who have started later on and got to where they wanted to. I'm just going to jump in on something here because someone's saying here, do you know who I am? And they sat next to me in 2018. This is probably when I was doing the podcast course with Rob Moore. And the really frustrating thing is you've got to put your name down now because I can't see who it is.
Yeah.
Could be. I remember sitting next to Sharon, and I'm wondering if it's her because there were a few people. I'm just wondering. We'll find out. So put your name up. And I can say hi to you.
Hi, it's so-and-so here. Right. So we meander on a path of passions, life changes, energy changes, playtime changes, learning changes, of course. Okay, so Nick, let's talk about what inspired you to do the podcast. I mean, I love the podcast. It's just so great. And for me, no interview with you would be complete without talking about that. So what gave you the idea? What gave you that burning passion?
Okay, so first and foremost, I procrastinated on the idea for a bloody long time, which I'm quite happy to admit. So let me go into it. So some people know this story, but I'll share it with you in a kind of quick way. When I was doing the private equity stuff, I was making a lot of cash, and I was just a bit of a horrendous person to be around. And the reason for that is I was following a path which was more about significance, about titles, about climbing to the top of something that I thought was going to give me fulfillment. And I kind of didn't really care what I did to get there. So I don't think that I'm, the worst person in the world for doing that. I think it's a common trait. A lot of people follow a path that they think is their path for a long time, and they don't do anything about it. They kind of live in this point of, I suppose, mediocrity. And there's a point that's come up. Did you create the pain point? I'm going to get to that. Yes, I did. Because I think you have to either go to a point of extreme pleasure or extreme pain to make any change. Okay. If you live in the middle, and a lot of people live in the middle their whole lives, they just get a so-so existence. And it's really quite, I suppose, upsetting thing to see.
I really love that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I learned. But basically, the long story short is this. I was working in private equity. We were doing some pretty big deals. It's a ruthless environment. It's changed a lot now. It's a lot better now. But if you think of the kind of whole Wall Street, Gordon Gekko type of thing, it's not far removed from that. It's all about money. It's all about value. It's all about numbers. It's interesting, but it's crazy as well. So anyway, so I was doing that, and was also, I had a few other things happen during that time. So my dad passed away, and I was quite stressed around all those sort of things. And I ended up going to bed one night, and I cracked all the teeth in the right side of my jaw. And it was a really full-on awakening. I look back, how you say things happen in your life and you're grateful for those things. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, it looked like I'd been punched in the face. And I went to the doctor in the morning. Then I went to the dentist straight after that, and they'd said that I basically grinded my teeth so aggressively. I must have gone to bed, and I can't remember what was happening, but I had so much stress. The bucket was so full that I just kind of must have been clenching my teeth so much that I cracked like 2 of them back here really badly. And so I thought, this isn't cool. I decided to make a change. I called up someone who I trusted, and he advised me to go to a Tony Robbins gig. So I went to Unleash the Power Within. And that was, where are we now? It was probably about 2017, maybe 2016, 2017. Anyway, I went to Unleash the Power Within. So it's about 3 years ago. And I cried for 3 or 4 days because I kind of got some new patterns of learning that I never knew existed in my head before. And one of the most powerful ones is this, and this is really cool, right? Is I was leading a lot with my head. But what I've learned since is the best decisions are made from your heart. And there's some scientific proof to this. If you can this is why meditation works. If you can get your brain waves and your heart waves working in unison, that's when people are in flow. And most people make their best decisions when they're both leading from their head and their heart. And I had no idea of this stuff. So anyway, after I went through this kind of awakening, if you like, I'd made a decision that weekend. So I was in Chicago, I made a decision that weekend that I was going to quit my job and I was going to go on a path back to kind of what I did when I was 18. I'm going to go back on an entrepreneurial journey. And so I made the decision, but I didn't effectively quit my job for a long time later, well over sort of a year, because I thought, you know what, I'm not going to put my family through the stress of that. I want to make sure that when I do this, I'm going to do it on my own terms. So what I did is I created Scale Up Your Business. I created, I suppose, the person you see now. Not that I was fundamentally different because, I was still me, but the way that I showed up in the world was different. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take everything that I've learned from 10 years of private equity, 15 years of corporate, and I'm going to put it all into the podcast. And so what happened was, and the reason I chose a podcast to kind of get into that is I wanted to have a vehicle where I could get my voice out there and get my message out there to help people. And one of the things that Tony Robbins taught me was that to be fulfilled in life, you have to have personal growth and you have to make a wider contribution. Yes. And everything before that was just about me being significant. And so part of the reason to do the podcast was if I can help people through the podcast, it means I'm making a contribution. And if that means that I can also go and do different things, it opens up a new world for me in terms of a career, then that's a secondary byproduct. But it's being able to do all those things and more. And I'm truly grateful for that. Being brave to make the decision, of course, but also trusting the fact that I could do it and putting myself out there.
Yes, and I know that this is something that you and I both share as a core belief, that if you create value first, then value will come back. And it's something that I also think about a lot. And it just sets up that energy, doesn't it, in the world that, I don't know, I was reflecting on it today, and I just think it's so powerful, isn't it? Because you just become greater than yourself, and people notice, because most people aren't like that. Most people are just me all the time. And if you actually do think about other people and you put value out there, then you are able to connect with those people in a really unusual way. And yeah, I love it.
I'll say this as well, and I think this is the other thing. People who listen to the podcast, and this is partly why I think it's been successful, and certainly it's sort of more successful than I expected, is because I do share my journey and I share my story on there in a pretty powerful way. I talk about, when I was bullied as a young kid. I talk about some of the distressing things that happened when I was a child. And I don't do that. People talk about vulnerability, and I don't do it for any sort of sympathy. I do it because I think vulnerability leads to strength. And it actually is. Someone's made a comment here about it being cathartic. It is cathartic. And in many cases, this is going to sound even weirder. I said before about I do the podcast to try and help one person. And by helping one person, I then have somehow it just scales from that. It ends up helping thousands. But when I first started doing the podcast, it was to help me. It was to help others, but I knew it had to help me first before I could help others.
Yeah, great. I love that. So we've got some more comments coming through, Nick. So did you grieve after quitting your job? Did you miss it and feel really sad?
I didn't miss the job. No, I didn't miss the job. I tell you what I did do. I had the oh fuck moment.
Did you?
which was, I say these days about being brave and having faith and all this sort of thing, and I believe that. But when you make a decision, it's one thing. When you execute, it's another. I knew I was going to do it because I had so much leverage in terms of the why behind what I wanted to do that there was no way of going back. My why was so strong. It still is, right? Hasn't changed. But when you finally cut the tie, I remember there was a couple of days where I was like, what have I done? I've done it. But there's no going back now. But Do you remember there was ages ago, Jane, you posted a video, I think it was in the Smart Connector group, where it was Arnold Schwarzenegger talking about having a plan B. And I love the
Yeah,
video
yeah.
because he says in there, he says, you can't have a plan B, because if you have a plan B, you've always got the safety net. And for me, you could argue I probably should have just cut the tie earlier, but as I said, I didn't want to, put that risk on my family. But, when I did it, it was still the best decision I made.
That's great. So more questions coming through, Nick. So let's have a look. Did the vehicle distract or take you away from your focus in mind space, and was it cathartic?
I think that's a question, but I think I answered that a little bit around if the vehicle is the podcast. I'm trying to think that the podcast has been cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, in many cases, the one thing I'd say, which I think answers quite a few of these things, is you do have to get leverage to sometimes take action. The way it was described to me, and it's a bit of a horrific way of describing it, but let's say someone who smokes a lot, they know it's going to cause problems, it can cause cancer, it can cause death, but sometimes you won't take any action from that because you attribute too much pleasure to the activity. But if your young son or daughter comes up and says, Dad, are you going to die because you're smoking? You're going to die of cancer. Then I've heard stories where people quit on the spot because all of a sudden there's more pain attributed versus the pleasure that they get from the act, and then they make change. And so that's what I did. I had a lot of pain, hence the broken teeth, like physically probably and emotionally. And I had a lot of leverage because I didn't want to be that guy for my family. So if I was, that's not showing up in the world, right? So now I feel, I wouldn't say I'm perfect now, but I must say I feel like I'm a better role model for people now doing what I'm doing than I was before.
Yes, yeah, that's a good analogy as well, Nick, because I've got a little story myself on that one. That when my youngest daughter was around 3, I did used to smoke because I worked in media in London. A lot of people used to smoke, so I used to take her out in her buggy, and I used to be having a cheeky cigarette, behind the buggy, pushing the buggy with one hand. And one day she turned around and she said, "What are you doing?" She started shouting at me and said, "What are you doing, smoking that disgusting thing? You're going to die, and then I won't have a mummy." And that was like, oh my God, I just felt the guilt. And I thought that was it. I quit on the spot. I thought, no more cigarettes. I just can't do it. I just can't have her thinking I'm going to die and that I don't care about her because I'm smoking. So it's funny, isn't it? It just backs up what you say. Okay, we've got somebody asking if you ever get back pain.
That might be for you.
Oh, really?
might have been pushing the buggy around.
It probably is. That's a long time ago.
I tell you what, and this is, some people know this, but again, they may not know this. I do extreme endurance stuff, right? And cycling and running and all those sort of things, mainly running.
Yeah.
And yeah, so in answer, if the question is to me, yeah, I get back, knee, elbow. No. I'm pretty good these days. You know what? There's a point. I tell you what's happened since I've started doing this, and I think you start to, when you're following your purpose and your mission, because even though it's not easy, like there are days that are easier than others. What you find is you kind of light up in different ways. I was coaching someone today, actually, another one of my clients, and I asked the question. I said, if there was one breakthrough goal that if you did that one goal, every other goal would sort of fall into insignificance because that one goal would get you everything you want, what would it be? Mm-hmm. And of course, like, it's a powerful question, right?
Yeah.
And he stopped and he reflected and he said what it was. But what was interesting is I watched the body language, and this guy's similar age to me, sort of mid-40s, and his whole face lit up, like really? Everything changed. He was like boom, like this. And I was like, there you go. That's the difference. So long answer to the kind of question that was there beforehand. But I used to suffer from a lot of ailments when I wasn't following my purpose. Now that I'm doing what I do, I feel much more energetic, much more alive, just different. And I'm sure that's because the stress levels, which can kill people, as we all know, are much more reduced now that I'm not, doing the stuff that wasn't right for me.
I think that's such a powerful point. And I also find that, Nick, I very, very rarely get ill because I just feel as though I'm doing what I'm supposed to do in this world. And I think as long as you've got that feeling of alignment, then it somehow filters through to your physical health and your physical energy, and you get a feeling of being unstoppable. And I think about when I was working full time, I used to come home and I used to have headaches in the evening, and I used to feel so low in energy, and I just don't get that anymore. And that's a kind of gift of entrepreneurship, I guess.
Yeah, and I want to be frank with, I mean, it's not for everybody necessarily. Like, and some people kind of think that entrepreneurship is the most important thing around. Listen, it is for me. I like the idea of freedom, and what was happening also is, prior to that, I was, getting sacked from jobs, and I was a bit chippy, and it was partly because I was stressed and everything else. I think entrepreneurship is a very fun career, if you want to call it a career. It's a fun journey. But if you like certainty in your life, if you like predictability, it's not that. It's definitely not that. But like anything, right? The more you practice, the more you work the muscle, the better you get at it. And I think that the more you spend time in this world, the more you kind of get used to what it is. And I think it'd be very hard to go back. I couldn't go back to traditional employment again, not in that way.
No, and I think it's also surrounding yourself with the right people. And this is something I never make any secret of the fact that I am also a huge fan of Nick's podcast. So I often put my little Bluetooth earpods on. I go out, take the dog for a walk, have a little walk around the field, have a little listen, and it's just very important, and it inspires me, and it's great. But it's very important just to be around people that have the same mindset, and a really positive mindset, and a can-do mindset, because in the world at large, there are people who are going to think that you're mad for pursuing the path that you're on. And so for me, that's been important. And Nick, how important would you say it is to surround yourself with people that think the same way, or can encourage you and inspire?
Yeah, there's a few sayings around this, and I forget who said them, but there's things like, you're the sum average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Was that a Jim Rohn one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other one is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Things like that. And I think if people ask me the playbook of kind of my journey, which is probably one of both personal and professional development, certainly over the last 3-4 years since I've kind of been on this path, which isn't that long, but a lot has happened right over that time. I've handpicked individuals and groups that I want to get close to that fit the vision of what I'm trying to create.
Yes.
So hence the reason I've got different mentors and different coaches. And what's interesting about that is you find that one person is right for a period of time, or one group is right for a period of time, and then you kind of outgrow that group. And that's exactly what should happen. Yes. So there's a piece where I've been involved in certain things, and then I've realized I've got what I needed, and incredibly grateful for those opportunities. And now I'm putting myself in different places. And a lot of my focus now is in the US, and again, we can touch on that tonight as well if you'd like. Yeah. And what I'm finding is as I start to go into these bigger rooms and surround myself with just different personalities and different experiences, my whole level of personal growth is going up incredibly. It's just so, if I look back, I'm just so different, my perspectives on things than what they were, back sort of 4 or 5 years ago.
Amazing. So let's talk about the US, Nick, because that is something that I'm very interested in. We ourselves have talked about it for a long time, because I'm also really interested in the US market, and have family out there and so on. So what made you decide to get a lot of US guests onto your show, first of all? Why did you launch your education product recently in the US? What is it about the US that you like, or that drew you to that?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people think it's a kind of a commercial reason, like there's lots of people there, so a bit like a boy band. If you make it in the US, you've made it. Right? But it's honestly not the reason. It may be in there somewhere in terms of like it's a big market and I want to get my message out there. But you know what? It's funny. I've always had an affinity with the US. I love US sports. I've always been, a massive fan of basketball. Love the Boston Celtics. A lot of the greatest experiences I've had in my life with friends, with family, have been in the US, just for various reasons. So when I mentioned my dad passing away beforehand, the last time I saw him was was on a beach in Martha's Vineyard near Boston after I'd run a 100-kilometer race. And it was one of those weird experiences where, you know, it was the most perfect day. He was fit and healthy. We just had this amazing week, and I was running. He'd managed to crew me in the race. So he'd basically been there for 12 hours helping me through it. And we kind of said goodbye that night on that beach. And then the next time I saw him was the day before he died in hospital a year later, because he lives in Melbourne. I was living in the UK. Yeah. And I don't know, there's been a lot of different stories like that about the US, which I've had a connection with. And so I feel like, I don't know if I want to live there, but I like being there, and I like some of the cultural things there. So that's the first point. The second thing is what I do and the message that I'm putting out there it tends to resonate quite well in that country. Not to say it doesn't resonate in the UK, it doesn't resonate well in Australia, but for some reason, I think the whole idea of skill set and mindset, creating freedom and, you know, living a life on your terms, the way that I talk about that it tends to work quite well there. Yeah. So what's happened is, again, through the podcast, I've met some fantastic people. I didn't necessarily go out and seek those people to come on the podcast. It came just through connections and conversations. And then I've been invited now to be represented over there by quite a big PR firm. And I've got 52 podcast shows coming up where I'm either guesting or doing things around in the next 6 months. One of them coming up on the 25th of June. It's now moved to July. It's got over 1 million people on it. And so I'm being interviewed for 30 minutes on that show.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's massive. And you know what? I honestly think, and as I said, I'm grateful for the whole thing, because I kind of still pinch myself a bit. I just think it's because I'm congruent with my message. And I think the message is a message that can help a lot of people. And so because that, I try and deliver that as honestly and as real, and sometimes maybe probably a little bit too real, as I possibly can, it's just seemed to hit the right note at the right time. And I think with everything that's going on now with COVID and all the uncertainty, now more than ever, people need help with their businesses. They need help with their livelihood. They need help generating income. And a lot of what I try and do is around that.
I think people find it really refreshing if you're just yourself. And I think that is the thing about you, is that you are very, very authentic. People know that what you see is what you get with Nick. You know, there's no fluff. And I think people really love that, because a lot of people do become different people in public than they are in private. And I just always get that feeling about you, that you just, what you are on the outside is what you are on the inside. And I love that. I find it very, very reassuring and consistent. And if I do, then I think other people must as well.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I don't, you know, it's one of those things, it's going to sound a bit weird. I appreciate the compliments, but sometimes I find it hard to wear.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I thank you. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, I can only be me. And let's be honest, I have people who really don't like me as well. And you mentioned it.
Yeah, I can't believe I was listening to the podcast that somebody suggested that you drink the devil's urine. It's like it was. It's out there, you know,
the quote was, "I hope you die drinking the devil's urine." And do you know what it was from, right? And this is like, I think we're testing out some. I have this business accelerator, and I was testing out some Facebook advertising on it. And listen, the ads they were okay. They were probably a little bit more direct than I would usually like them to be, but they did their thing, and it obviously just annoyed a few people. And oh my God, I've had more than that. I've had more than that.
Come on, let's hear it. What else has people said?
I'll tell you something last week, and this is a bit of an interesting one, because you're 100% right. Like, sometimes I'll say it as it is, and I'm pretty direct, right? So if someone needs a message and I think it needs to be delivered in a certain way, I'll be brave enough to say it, for right or for wrong.
Yeah.
And so I did something on LinkedIn last week that it's actually it's a post that had probably some of the highest views I've ever had on LinkedIn, but I put a picture of myself as a 10-year-old boy.
Okay.
And at 10-year-old, so I weigh, people are going to hate me for this again, but I weigh something like 75 kilograms now, which is I don't know what that is in stone, but I weighed 25 kilograms more, I think, as an 8-year-old, something like that. Right. And anyway, when I was 10, I was kind of like 5 or 10 kilos more than I am now. Right. So I was huge. Anyway, so I put a photo of me up there and I said, is it acceptable for a child to get this fat? Okay. So I put that up there. Now, I was called a racist. I was called a bully. And I didn't listen. Here's the funny thing, right? I put the photo up there. I was playing with it to have a bit of fun. So I didn't say it was me. And I also didn't pass judgment. I didn't say it's bad to be fat. I didn't say anything, actually. I just said, is it acceptable for a child to get this fat? And I used the word fat. I could have said different words. I get it, right? You know, you're a bastard, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff, right? Now, I did it deliberately because the next post that I did was the message of transformation.
Right.
Right. Because what I said is, you know, at that time I was in a lot of pain. I literally had to lock myself in the boys' toilets at school because every lunchtime I was getting bullied by people, and in some cases quite violently bullied. Right.
Oh.
And I didn't have anyone around me. My dad had left at that point in time. So I had to pull myself out of the gutter. Right. And what I did is I lost the weight. I taught myself how to eat differently. I committed myself to exercise. And I do appreciate that lots of people, you know, they have issues being overweight or whatever else, and they can't change that. And that wasn't the point of the post. The point of the post was, do you know what? I was in a really bad place. I had to do something to take action. I committed myself. I was disciplined, and I got out of it. And what was fascinating, right, is on the second post, I had 3 people call me all these different names. I had 25 people say that post changed them. The insight that I gave them changed them. A couple of people said they were in tears because they actually had the realization that they could change too.
Really?
So do you know what? It might have been the style. My point here is it was direct. It was a bit full on. It was a bit out there. It was racy. It was edgy, as I was told. But you know what? I had all these people helped. Some people didn't like it, but some people massively liked it. And, you know, for me, sometimes you've got to, when you're in a position like we all are in this world where, like you and I particularly, where you've got a voice and you've got a vehicle to get it out there, you've got to be able to roll with that sort of stuff.
Yes, and it is about polarity, isn't it? Because you're not going to be everybody's person, and neither should you be. There will be some people who gravitate towards you, just like, you know, we gravitated towards each other. And I still remember the first time I actually met Matt. I actually met Nick on the mastermind, and I said to him, it's a funny story. I said, I've been listening to a really good podcast. I said, I love it. And he said, oh, really? Oh, that sounds interesting. He said, what's it called? I said, Scale Up Your Business. And he was like, oh, that's my podcast. Really?
It was so funny because you were talking about doing a Scale Up Your Business event, and I was like, that's my podcast.
Yeah, which I did subsequently do, and you were subsequently the keynote speaker.
I did. I came and spoke. It was fantastic. It was great fun. You did a great job of that. But it was so funny. Your face when that happened, and I'm like, because I was so funny because I went back and sat at my table because we were sitting at different tables, and I said that I just had to tell people about it because it was just.
That's funny. So we've got some more questions coming through. Oh, we've got Jess she's registered. So well done, Jess. She went through the process. And she says, very smart, take your journey through your audience, very powerful. Okay, somebody else says polarization, duality, interesting concepts and experience. So I think people are just commenting. So what else should we talk about, Nick, that would give value tonight before we go?
Yeah, so I've got what I was going to suggest is we've worked together on the accelerator that I've been doing, obviously for about the last sort of 6 months. I'm doing a webinar tomorrow night at 8 p.m. So I think if people want to join that, then we'll put a link into the notes or into the group. Yeah. Just to be clear who that's for and who it's not for, because I want to make sure that if people are going to give up their time on an evening, on a Thursday, that it's of value. I've got around business growth and scale up. I've created a framework, if you like, because people always ask me, well, how do you do this? And what I often say is it's not necessarily a formulaic process. It's not templated, but there are frameworks that you can apply to any business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 90 minutes teaching that on Thursday night, so 8 until 9:30. So if anyone's interested in coming to that, please, I think that there's a link that someone's put there, probably Eve's put in there. Yeah, so join that if you want to come along. And you know what, if you haven't got a business and you're thinking of starting one, it's not specifically for you. But you know what? It's funny. There's a lot of people who've contacted me recently who have lost jobs because of everything that's going on. And they've said, listen, how do I even start thinking about entrepreneurship?
Yes.
So there are going to be some concepts in there around mindset and belief systems. And I think if you're in that place, come along, see if you like it. You know, if it works for you, stay for the whole thing. If not, then leave. But I'm going to try and cover as many bases as I can to help people on Thursday night.
That sounds awesome, Nick. I have an interview on Thursday round about the same time. So if people like myself are otherwise engaged, will there be a replay?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll make sure that I'm going to record the webinar.
Yes.
Because it's quite long. Obviously, it's going to be 90 minutes because I want to go deep into some of these systems that we teach.
Yes.
So people can get a link to that afterwards as well.
Okay, great. Right. Well, I guess I better let you get back to your evening, but it has been such a pleasure to have you here tonight, Nick. And thank you very much to everybody that tuned in and was commenting. I'm sure this is going to be a very popular episode. It's going to go up on YouTube and obviously be on the podcast as well. So, yeah, thank you for being here, Nick.
No, it's awesome, Jane. I just want to sort of a bit of a shout out to everyone who's stayed with us for the last hour. Yeah. These comments, it's a real shame I can't see all the names because some of these comments are amazing and really good. So again, I'm thankful for you guys for being here this evening. Thanks for engaging so much. And yeah, Jane, as always, a pleasure offering value to you and your audience, and always happy to help where I can.
Okay, great. We'll see you all soon.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.